Hello, my name is Vito Quaglia. Welcome to A Matter of Principle, a podcast about school, sports, and leadership. Today, our guest is Mr. Ed Ackerman, someone who's been writing professionally for over 50 years. Right after graduating as valedictorian in the very first graduating class of Pittston Area High School, Mr. Ackerman was hired as a sports writer for the Sunday Dispatch in Pittston. He began writing his personal column, Ed Ackerman Optimist, back in 1984 and continues to write. Nowadays, it's in the Greater Pittston Progress, in addition to the Citizens Voice newspaper, and his Optimist blog also appears online on the Pittston Progress website. Mr. Ackerman is a professor of communications at Luzerne County Community College. So without further ado, let's welcome the award-winning writer and college professor, Mr. Ed Ackerman, to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Vito. It's nice to be here.
Well, this is a new podcast. We just started recording some episodes this summer. And in a nutshell, just so you know, the listener at home, and also Mr. Ackerman, know where we're going. It's basically just a conversation, a free-flowing conversation about sports and life lessons and leadership, maybe some mentors that we've had in the past, and maybe some people that we've influenced or had some impact upon ourselves. So, let's just start off with your career, Mr. Ackerman. You've worked in the communications field for decades. Is there something that you can attribute your longevity and your success to?
Oh, that's a darn good question. In life, there's always something that's a bit of luck. And I often quote the old baseball commissioner, Branch Rickey. And he made a statement about luck, and it's misquoted. And the misquote is as good as the actual quote. So the misquote, people say luck is the residue of desire. That's the misquote, which is a pretty good one. The actual quote is luck is the residue of design. And so I guess maybe those two things came together. The design was me being a really good student in school, and the luck was a mentor, a teacher of mine had been writing sports for the Dispatch and was taking a job out of town and said, I'm going to recommend you for the part-time sports writing job. And that'll be a good job for you while you're in college. It'll be a nice little paycheck on the side. And that's what got me into the field. And I think after that, for whatever reason, I never lost my enthusiasm for it. And I think maybe that shows in the stuff I write. I still am very enthusiastic about communicating with people.
Well, and I think one of the things that makes a good storyteller and makes a good story is when you marry that, universal theme with something specific that people can latch onto. And so much of what you write, and I've, been lucky enough to see you serving as a Toastmaster or a speaker and different things. And you have that knack. You know how to, bring a universal theme into something that all of us, have a personal connection to. So I definitely think that's something that runs throughout all of your columns and all of your stories. And now you talked about sports, and you've had tremendous opportunities over the years to interview and to cover hundreds of great athletes and coaches. And I know this, I'm putting you on the spot with this, but could you name one or two of the best athletes that you've seen in your time of covering sports?
Yeah, that was all local sports, as you know.
Sure. Yep.
And that's a question I'm asked of quite frequently, believe it or not, because I did that for about 15 years on the sidelines, on courtside, things like that. And what I say, and I say it in all honesty, the best athlete is not what people might think. They might think I'd say Jimmy Cephalo. He's the best football player I ever saw. But the best athlete is the guy who's the current AD at Pittston area, Charlie Turco. What a tremendous three-sport talent, natural ability, unbelievable natural ability. And a lot of people will agree with me when they hear that. On the west side, from my years of covering sports, I say the version of that from Wyoming area is a kid named Donnie McDermott. And interestingly, Donnie McDermott was a star in the first sporting event I ever covered. In the summer of '67, when I got the job, I was sent up to Tunkhannock to cover the Little League All-Star District Championship game. And Donnie McDermott, who looked like a little professor in his professorial-looking glasses, pitched a tremendous game that day for West Wyoming All-Stars. That was Little League. And as he went through high school and so forth, I put him in that same category, tremendous all-around athlete. There have been dozens of others, of course, but those two guys really stand out.
Okay. How about coaches? There's been plenty of coaches on both sides of the river and in the valley. Who would you say are the one or two?
I have tremendous respect for all coaches, and I was lucky enough, to to spend a lot of years writing about Bob Barbieri's football teams. And Bob Barbieri, to me, was a much misunderstood person. The fiery guy on the sidelines was not the guy off the field. Bob Barbieri was a philosopher, an educator first, and just a great all-around guy. I love that man, and I miss him tremendously. On the I got to know Jack Gallagher a little bit when he coached basketball at Pittston area. Jack Gallagher was good friends with Coach K, good friends with Bobby Knight. I mean, so, my 1 degree of separation to those guys was tremendous. Got to know Jack Henzis when he first started at Wyoming area, and then Tom Vaxmansky followed there. And then Paul Marenka, they're about to dedicate the weight room facility at Wyoming area in Paul's honor, and that's a great honor. So over the years, just Jimmy Comensberger coached St. John's when it was the PCIAA, the Pennsylvania Catholic Interscholastic Athletic Association, and took a team to the state finals, and I got to cover all of that. So yeah, I never met a coach who, keep in mind, I was a kid when I started. So there were coaches being interviewed by an 18-year-old, and every one of them treated me with tremendous respect, every one of them.
What do you think? And some of those coaches that you mentioned, I mean, legendary, fellas who lasted years in those positions. And today, you don't see that kind of longevity with coaching. I mean, you might, there's outliers here and there, but a lot of times, someone's in a spot for 3, 4, 5 years and they move on. Do you think there's different, I don't know if it's patience with people who hire these guys, or, you have to win at all costs, or do you think that student athletes today are different than they were, back in the past? What do you think about that?
I think yes to everything you just said. I think times have changed. Players have changed. I think, it's harder to raise a family, and I'm talking from an economic perspective. So if a coach, and we've known this for years, if a coach were to figure out what the coach is paid per hour to coach, it's ridiculous. And, sometimes a teacher maybe can't make ends meet on a teaching salary in today's day and age. And those hours that could be spent coaching, something a coach absolutely loves, the fellow might have to say, I got to do something else to supplement my income. This is taking me away from my family, and the reward isn't there. And that's a shame. But one thing about longevity of coaches, Wyoming area picked up a few games with Columbia, the tremendous football program down there. And I remember a couple of years ago when they decided to play them, Southern Columbia winning all kinds of state titles. And somebody told me the coaching staff at Southern Columbia has been the same for 30 years. Yeah. That produces a winner. When you're jumping back and forth year to year to year to year, there's no consistency. The teaching becomes different, and it's hard to win that way. It's tough. It's always been tough to coach. I think it's harder to do it in today's day and age. Then you have social media. It was one thing for the fans to yell at you on Friday night from the sidelines at a football game. Now you get lambasted all week long on social media. So, and you hit the nail on the head when you said now it's like, there's only two things now. You win it all or you're a loser, and that's a shame. Especially in high school sports, it should be an experience more than a one-loss thing. But keep talking.
No, and I agree with you. That's one thing. Remind me. Hope I should write a note. I want to talk about high school sports versus like travel sports and things like that. Like that, there's two different kind of things going on. I want to get your take on that. But going back to Pittston area, and you were there when the jointure happened. Who was you probably had more than one, but who would you say might be your favorite teacher that you had at Pittston Area High School?
That's another interesting question. Again, I was a very good student, and maybe there's a chicken and egg thing there. I liked all of my teachers. Maybe they liked me. Maybe I was a teachable guy. A lot of names stand out. A fellow just passed away a few days ago. Jim Gilmartin was my world cultures teacher in high school. He's the guy about a month after I graduated high school who called me up and said, I told the people at the Sunday Dispatch I'd find them a sports writer, and I think it's going to be you. That man changed my life forever. I did not start out to get into journalism. He put me in journalism, and I'm still in it, 50 some years later. So there's him. But when I mentioned Jimmy Comensberger, the coach earlier, I had him as a teacher, and I really liked that man. I liked his style. He taught French, but Before there was, Vito, you're in education. What are the letters of the state tests that kids have to take today to prove they learned something?
Well, the PSSA, yeah.
Those things, PSSA. You know what? They're the ruination of education. A guy like Jim Cohensberger teaching French wasn't teaching us to a test. What he was doing was giving us his whole self. So in the French class, he was a philosopher. He was a historian who would go to the arts a little bit, and he would teach us French. But there wasn't something hanging over his head as a teacher to make sure we passed a standardized test at the end of the year. And that applies to all of my teachers. And so they go off script is what I'm saying. And, a long time ago, I heard a quotation. Long time ago. I'm talking at least 50 years ago. I heard this quotation. An education is everything you remember after you've forgotten everything you learned in high school. I'll repeat it. An education is everything you remember after you've forgotten everything you learned in high school. That's worth unpacking a little bit. We don't have to do that now. But I always thought that made a lot of sense. And then I heard many years later who said it. Albert Einstein.
Wow.
So can I get by in a little bit of French after taking 4 years of French with Jim Cohensberger? Once in a while, just about get by. But are his fingerprints all over me as a man? You bet. You bet.
Well, and that kind of is one of the things that, the podcast is built upon, is this idea of relationships, right? Where every success you can have, and it's a Vito Quaglia opinion. I think some people would agree. It's based on your relationship with your partner in life, your relationship with your job, your relationship with your team, if you're a coach, your class, if you're a teacher. And if you invest in that relationship, you're going to see success. And I think teachers like the guys you mentioned, cared more about their students and making those connections than I'm sure they cared about the content they were teaching, but just by what you're talking about, it shows me that they cared about the relationships as well.
Yeah. A book came out last year or the year before called The Good Life. The Good Life was based on the longest study ever of what it takes to be happy. And the study was over 70 years old. It started with a study group of men who were at Harvard, because there were only men there, and then people in and around the Boston area. John F. Kennedy, as a college student, was one of the people in the group. And what the researchers did over the years was interview them, ask them questions. As they grew up, they asked them more questions. As they died off, they asked their offspring if they would participate. As the people who started the study died off, people picked it up. So for 70 some years, through surveys mostly, they tried to deduce what makes for a happy life. You know what they came up with more than anything else? Relationships.
Wow.
Relationships.
There you go.
Lots and lots. And not necessarily romantic ones, but lots of relationships. The more relationships you can build, the happier you will be in life, which is underscoring what you just said. And one thing about the teachers building relationships back then, not only did they want to, but they were allowed to. I think today some teachers may want to, but they're kind of hamstrung a little bit by a standardized test that somehow worth and proves that students are getting what they're supposed to be getting. And if you ask me, those things don't prove a thing.
Well, and it goes to, what people are held accountable to. I mean, the papers will come out every year when the state test scores come out, and they rank the schools by their test scores. And not to besmirch the media, but they don't come out with a survey or a ranking system of those kind of things. Rank your school by the kind of relationships that your faculty builds with your students. I mean, I don't know how you would measure that, but I mean, they're the things that we all know mean something. And I'm sure that you were valedictorian, so you knew that you had great grades, but for the most part, when you ask someone about a favorite teacher, they can't remember the grade point average maybe they had in that class, but they remember how that teacher made them feel. And they're the measurables that matter, but yet, we don't report on that. We don't rank schools based on that, which is sad.
We want to reduce everything to almost a contest. I agree with you. When those results are published, there's nothing in between the lines. And, the real measure of something working is not necessarily quantifiable in that way. I know we want it to be, we'd love it to be, but it isn't. And I maintain, even though, like that term valedictorian, I don't walk around with a big V on my chest.
I would.
But I maintain that grades aren't that great a measure of anything. And even though my grade point average put me at the top of a class, did the grade in any given class measure what I got out of it? No. And I tell my students today, I said, at the end of a semester, you're going to get a grade. The grade has very little to do with what you will take with you. If you got nothing out of the class, and for some reason, a clerical error, or I'm just being a benevolent guy, I stick A after your name, but you got nothing. That A doesn't mean you suddenly got something. Whatever you got out of the class has nothing to do with the grade you get at the end. I know I guess we feel we have to quantify things, but I just think that when we make that too big of a deal, it's not a sporting event when we look in the paper and we say, Princeton area did this and somebody else didn't do that, or whatever the schools might be. We almost make everything a contest anymore.
Mm-hmm. No, it's kind of our nature as being competitive people, but I think it's what we measure, too, that I think we lose track of. We try to grasp for something that ranks, somebody somewhere. And the only thing that is published, unfortunately, are test scores. And I think we have to find some other measurable things. Talking about teaching now and your career, your career in writing that started, when you were just a kid yourself, did you know you wanted to be a teacher? What led you to become that professor at LCC? How did that happen?
Not at all. I think, I didn't even want to be a writer. I began college as an art major. I could always draw, and I wasn't so sure what I was going to do with that. I really didn't. Yeah, I remember a guy named Joe Schwalik was like a counselor at Wilkes. That's where I went to school. And I remember I went there with my mom. My parents knew nothing about college. And we went to a meeting, and he looked at my transcript and he said, I see you're majoring in art. I said, yeah. And he looked quizzically and he said, is that something you really want to do? And I went, yeah. And I think he was wondering with my grades, why wasn't I doing something else? Mm-hmm. And he never said it, and that was fine. But as far as the writing, as I said, a former teacher, said he thought I could do a good job writing sports for the local paper. And that ignited that writing in me. Never dreamt I'd make a career out of it, but it kept getting more interesting. I stayed with it. And then I worked for the Little Sunday Dispatch. It was a weekly paper. Well, all week long, we did other things. And I know this is a long answer to your question, but one of the things we did was we had a printing press, and a really wonderful printing press and a great quality of printing. We wound up printing all of the college newspapers in the area. And each college had a different relationship with us. And the late Tom Moran, Moran, was the advisor to the Beacon, the paper at Wilkes. Mm-hmm. And what he worked out was he brought the whole Wilkes staff up to the Sunday Dispatch on a Tuesday, when we weren't real busy, we were a Sunday paper. And he basically had me teach them all the things about journalism. I was just doing that because it was fun, never realizing off to the side was this man observing me. Well, a few years went by, I get a call from Wilkes, what I consider being an adjunct professor in some journalism classes. And so I did. And then 1989, I get a call from Tom Moran, who's now the president of Luzerne County Community College. Would I ever consider teaching journalism full time at the college? And so I didn't set out to be a teacher, and there we were. I said to Mr. Moran, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. And he said, yeah, but you've got 23 years experience in the newspaper field, and we have a formula that qualifies you at a PhD level. We'd love to have you here. It was a big pay cut. My kids were little, and it meant I'd be home with them all summer long. So I took the pay cut, and that was 1990, and it's now 2024.
Now, some people think of teaching as an art. Other people, think teaching as a science. What do you think? Or do you think it's a little bit of both?
I think probably never having an education course in my life, it became a seat of the pants thing with me. And seat of the pants operations usually have a little more art in them than science. I probably could use a little more of the science. One thing I did immediately, and there might be some art in this, I don't know. I'm a problem solver. And I remember thinking, what do the kids really know? And what do they know? They know inside out. It sticks to their ribs. It's not the Battle of Hastings in 1066. What do they know? And I came up with most of them college kids, they all know how to drive. And they thought, did they learn that sitting in a classroom 3 days a week for 15 weeks with the PowerPoint presentation? Did they learn that from somebody with a PhD in driving? They learned it probably from a mom or dad at the end of a long day of working somewhere, who the last thing they wanted to do was take them driving, who knew nothing about pedagogy. They're trying to teach their kid how to drive, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they all learned how to drive. And I knew why. It's obvious why. Motivation. They really wanted to learn how to drive. And so I've always tried to employ or incorporate motivation into everything I teach. You know, I teach public speaking. The kids may wonder, why the heck do I need to know this? What's the motivation for this? And I tell them on day one, you can go through your whole life never giving a speech. So there's no motivation there. You can go through your whole life never giving a speech. But I say, I'm sorry to tell you, you can't go through your whole life never losing to death someone you love. And when that happens, you might be the perfect person to get up at a service and talk about them. And if you don't know how to do it, you'll sit there while someone else does it, and you'll feel real bad that you couldn't give your friend or your loved one this gift. And there's some motivation there then. You know, maybe they'll never employ those skills for another 50 years, and I hope they don't. But when the time comes, they'll know how to do it. And so I try to do that with everything. I try to motivate them. Now, that sounds more artsy to me than science, but what do I know?
No, I think that, I mean, as a former English teacher myself, that's a really cool, vehicle to get the motivation, because thinking everyone, unfortunately, will deal with the loss of a loved one, and, hearing good eulogies or maybe wanting to be that person that can show that, appreciation and celebration of that life. That is tremendous motivation. So that's really cool. If you thought that one on your own, you're top notch, my friend. That was all right. I like that.
You're kind to say that. You know what I'm doing, as a teacher, thing else. I always want to give everything my best every single time. I always want to give it my best, and I want to keep analyzing myself and checking myself on what I'm doing and stuff like that. And people ask me why I'm not retired. Vito, you mentioned the year I graduated. So next fall, I will turn 75 years old. And people say, when are you going to retire? And I say, so far, at the beginning of every semester, I'm unbelievably enthused. I'm excited, and I say, I'm going to teach this class better than I did it last time. And the minute I don't feel that way, then I'll know this is my last semester coming up.
Well, that's the way to do it, because I'm a huge Springsteen fan, and I'll still go see him, and he's still, rocking in his 70s, and Mick Jagger, and Keith, they're out there at 80. So if you love it, if it's a passion, and you still have that fire and you still enjoy it, you keep doing it, because I think that's, unfortunately, people slow down and retire and stop doing things, and that's when, before you know it, they become sick or something else happens because they lost that fire. So if you can keep it kindled, I mean, that's terrific.
We need a purpose.
Absolutely.
We need a purpose. Yep.
When you said the best for a person I was talking to, Frank Parenti, was talking about how he teaches and coaches and always trying to motivate his players and his students in the classroom to be the best versions of themselves. And he tries to bring that every day when he's teaching and coaching. And you echoed that same thing. And that reminds me of, something you probably heard, Sinatra saying that, why do you give it your all? You're old, and, towards the end of his career. And he said, you see that guy, there's somebody in the rafters that paid, all their money and 3 paychecks to come and see me. And that's the first time he ever saw me. And I want him to feel like it means something, like he always brought his best.
Two thoughts come to mind there. One, along those lines, when I think of the NBA, and I think of a guy saves and saves and saves and takes his kid to his first National Basketball Association game, and the star has decided to take the night off just to rest up. That's the opposite of what you just said about Sinatra. Yep. And the other thing is, there's a great story about Joe DiMaggio, where the Yankees had already clinched the pennant. They're going to go to another World Series, and there's a fly ball to the outfield, and DiMaggio makes a diving catch. And afterwards, a reporter says to him, like, why did you do that? You could have hurt yourself, and the team really needs you in the playoffs. And DiMaggio said, I'm always thinking there might be someone in the stands who never saw me play before. Mm-hmm. That's giving your all the time.
Well, and it's such, it fights at the fabric of what, America this is going to be a giant broad stroke of a comment, but I mean, we kind of hold ourselves up as, we're individuals and we can do anything. And, it's almost, unfortunately, capitalism, breeds that me, and, what can I do for myself and my family, and at all, win at all costs or succeed at all costs. But then everything you read, talks about servant leadership and, whatever faith you follow, always talks about sacrifice and, worrying about the community instead of yourself kind of thing. And Simon Sinek writing books about, that leaders eat last, make sure all your guys are fed first and then you go. So it's just, there's a dichotomy, right? There's these two different things that you see all the time. You see people that work, their tail to the bone to be successful, and maybe they're sacrificing some things that they'll regret someday. And then you see other people like you're talking about that every day, like, hey, guess what? I got to bring my best because I don't want to let anyone down. And where's the balance? I mean, can you have the balance? Can you be an alpha? Can you be a leader and still be a servant leader successfully? Or what do you think about that?
Boy,
that's a lot. I know there's a lot there.
I'd like to say yes. I'd like to say yes, that we can be these perfect people, really. But, as much as I bill myself as Ed Ackerman optimist, I think the truth is I'm Ed Ackerman realist. I take an optimistic approach to everything. I'm a very, very positive person, but I am a realist. And, sometimes the skill sets that we're talking about that we value, if you're blessed with those, it's hard not to let those become a tool you use to gain financial success and maybe lose yourself in the process. We don't reward the good qualities that we're talking about. And so people who want to be self-motivated to be the best they could be without just striving for material success, boy, it takes a lot to keep hanging on to that. We don't live in a society that rewards that very, very well. We measure people by what they're driving and how big their houses are, and that's just the way it is. And I'm not saying we're bad for doing that. I'm just saying that's the way it is. I've said, and I mean this, and I mean this truthfully. If I look at that V word again, valedictorian coming out of Pittston area, and I would say, depending on the yardstick you use to measure me, someone could take out a yardstick and say, wow, what an underachiever. He teaches at a community college and he writes for the local paper. What an underachiever. We thought he was going to write for the New York Times or Sports Illustrated or be an anchor on TV. And look what he wound up doing. That's one yardstick. You take another yardstick out, and it's the one, fortunately, that I measure myself by. And you think of, did I make a difference? Did I influence lives? Did I do this and that? And you kind of say, okay, I did it right. But it depends on who's doing the measuring and what the value system is.
Speaking about influence, in all the years that you've covered different events and just written about a myriad of topics, could you name a couple of the most influential people that you think have come from the greater Pittston area?
Ooh, gosh, gee. You look at people often come back and think of Jimmy Cephalo. He played in the NFL. He scored a touchdown in a Super Bowl. I recall that Penn State did not have the following that Penn State has today before Jimmy Cephalo played at Penn State. And when he played there, it seemed like all of Pittston wanted to get down to a game all the time. And then that just built and built and built. That's tremendous influence. There are people, greater Pittston people that went on to influence. I'd have to give that some more thought. Does someone pop into your mind? And then I'll elaborate on that.
Well, I always think, like from our conversations in the past, I'm like a local history buff, and I think there's a pocket in Northeast PA that not a lot of people who aren't from here, know our history. And if you think about some of the things, whether it's, Greater Pittston is a smaller thing, but I think about, Mr. McGowan, from down in Nashville, where I came from with the telecommunications and MCI, I think it was, and all that. Mm-hmm. And then, you have, different people that went on to be bishops or cardinals. And, Pittston itself, there's some notorious people from our area that also went on maybe to have influence, whether it's good influence or bad influence. But, if you think about some of the ones, and I think some people don't come back, that's another thing too, that maybe people go on and leave and become successful and might have influence somewhere else in the country or in their community, but they're from here. That's what I was thinking of. I was kind of hoping that you would know some people that I don't know because you've been covering so many stories for so long.
When I think of the guy I mentioned earlier, the Jim Gilmartin who got me my job, he left for Hamburg, Pennsylvania to become a vice principal of a high school. He later became superintendent of Hamburg area. He did that for about 14 years. After that, in retirement, one after another, his services were sought to be an interim superintendent at struggling school districts. And he was doing that over and over and over. At one point, Pittston area brought him back to advise George Cosgrove when he was the superintendent of Pittston area. So this guy had nothing but success in the area of Hamburg, Pennsylvania. Never had any children of his own and has a surprisingly tiny extended family, but always, and I know numbers, but I don't feel privileged to mention them, but a lot of checks came from Mr. Gilmartin to a lot of causes back in his hometown of Pittston. The thing that is a matter of record is scholarships. The Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, supported completely by Mr. Gilmartin, full rides at his alma mater, King's College, that he funded. So never had an opportunity to come back here physically, although came back frequently. Wasn't that far of a drive. But boy, supported this area over and over and over. That's pretty cool. A success story that the Greater Pittston Chamber of Commerce just honored Sandy Insulaco with the Titan of Industry Award. And Insulaco is a very, very wealthy man. Insulaco has made a lot of other people wealthy by giving them opportunity. He's employed a lot of people and is still going at it. I think he turns 85 or 84 this summer, 85, I think. And at the Chamber of Commerce event when he was honored, his accomplishments were listed. And what he said was, I'm really glad that I was able to do all of that right here. I would not wanted to have done all the things I did anywhere else. I wanted to do them where I was born and where I grew up. That's a real success right there, I think.
Oh, definitely. And that old attribute, you don't forget where you came from. So clearly he never forgot where he came from. I mean, if you think about, the Insulaco family, the Falcone family with, the brothers that started the distributorship. I don't know if those types of, I want to say rags to riches, but I mean, humble beginnings to people that are really successful. I don't know if that happens much anymore, where a whole family, works together and holds it together and realizes generational wealth, things like that those two families have. And I'm sure there's countless others all over the place, but now you'll see, individuals that are successful and sometimes successful overnight and they can't manage that success and it falls apart a little bit, but that incremental growth and like starting very humbly, whether it's a little fruit stand on the side of a road and building and building and building and being smart with your money. It seems like people don't have patience to build that way anymore.
Yeah, I don't think society has it. And I think you're right. Yeah, so I don't know if we'll see that again. Here's an example of talk about being what you are, let's say. Being an example of what you preach is the mayor of Pittston, Mike Lombardo. Mike Lombardo lives in town. Mike Lombardo lives in Pittston. Mike Lombardo restored a home on Broad Street, lived in it for a while, moved up the street a little bit, bought an older home and restored it. So he's the mayor of the town and he lives right in the heart of Pittston, right downtown. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool because he could be in any of the wonderful developments that are still Greater Pittston, on a couple of acres of ground and stuff like that. But he's on Broad Street. When he was mayor and he was living across the street in a home he restored. And Mike was a track guy in high school and at Bucknell. And he used to tell me that he lived a triple jump away from his office in City Hall.
Now I might be wrong with this, so correct me if I am, but doesn't he tell people that one of the main reasons that he ran to be mayor was when he was so heartbroken with the old American theater was.
Yeah. He says that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my friend Jack Smiles just wrote a story about the history of the American theater. And Jack Smiles is the consummate researcher, and it appeared in Pittston Progress. And I always had a sense that the American theater was even bigger than the Kirby Center. And Jack had the seating capacity. American theater sat 2,300 people. The Kirby seats 1,800. The American theater, the wrecking ball hitting that building was really a shame. Really, really a shame. And of course, Mike Lombardo, his plans are to build probably a 350-seat theater in town, which I think will work very, very well. There's a similar one down in Sellersville, Pennsylvania, the Sellersville Theater, and I think it's exactly what Mike has in mind. And I've been down there, and I look forward to that happening in Pittston.
Well, and I think we're definitely taking a left turn on this, but it's a good thing. The sidewalks and all of that. And, you always have detractors of, oh, what are they doing? We need other things. Why are we doing sidewalks? Well, the research shows that if there's walkable neighborhoods, there's so much more people want to move there. And then if you could walk to a market or, some kind of little, whatever it is, a niche store here or there, that people will retire to communities like that because that's what they want. I mean, that's that nostalgia of that's what it was like when I was a kid kind of thing. But so you can see that Mike and his team has really researched what works, found the grants and what's out there available to get the money here, the funding here. They've done a tremendous job. And I know other little towns around kind of look to Pittston, the downtown as a blueprint of what they could do, so it's really a tremendous story that they've done.
Former Representative Mike Carroll, the village or the town of Moscow was in his purview, his district, and he was up there one time a few years ago, and he said to the leaders of Moscow, "What can I do for you?" And they said, "Turn us into Pittston." What a tribute to Mike Lombardo. And what I say about Mike Lombardo, and you said it just briefly a second ago, you got to have vision, but you got to find the money. Mm-hmm. And to have vision and money and public money can only take you so far, but the public money can set you up in a situation where the private people want to invest their funds. And once that happens, now you're rolling. And we're seeing that. Pittston City is becoming a place where people want to live downtown. When they remodeled the old Pittston Apparel building into high-end luxury apartments, they were all booked before they were even ready to be occupied. People want to live in town because it's desirable. And Mike Lombardo will cast a spotlight on his team, and that's a big part of it. But nothing in Pittston is happening without Mike Lombardo.
No, I agree. And it wasn't too long ago, for anybody who might be out there listening that doesn't understand what Pittston is.
Vito, you still there?
Oh, I'm here. Yes. Well, did I cut out? We can edit that part. So that's good. Did you hear me say?
Yeah, you cut out.
Did you hear me?
You were starting to say something about Lombardo and downtown, and you cut right out.
Okay, I'll go back to that. So not many years ago, rather, there's boarded up storefronts, and downtown Pittston was not a place that anyone would want to go. You would kind of drive through there quickly, and it was really, a place that no one had a lot of pride in. So in a matter of, I think only 2 decades, really, maybe the late 90s is when everything started to kind of swing in his direction. He's done a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, I agree. It's fun to say you're part of this community, and you drive through Pittston.
Ed, can you hear me? I wonder what happened. We lost you. I lost you at 39. Okay. Do you have any non-negotiables in your routine that you have to complete in order to have a good day, a good week, or a good month? I know you like to work out, so that's probably important to you. But is there anything else in your routine?
I love that term, non-negotiables. At one point in my life, I'm sure there were lots of them, but here's my philosophy of life. And, I've known a lot of people who have gone through recovery, and there's some tremendous philosophies that come out of that. And one of them is only control the things you can control. That's a great way to go through life if you can learn that. Only control the things you can control. And I always say I've adopted that and adapted it. So for me, it goes like this. I only control the things I can control, and I can't control anything. So a good day for me is a day when I get to sweat. If I could run on an elliptical, if you see me at Planet Fitness after I've been on an elliptical, say hi to me, but don't touch me because you'll get grossed out. I have a massive perspiration. That's not a non-negotiable because life gets in the way. And so there was a time when I could run, when my knees allowed me to run. If I didn't get in a 5-mile run every day, I was miserable all day long. I don't want to be that way. So I don't want there to be non-negotiables. I guess I want to roll with the punches.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Now, if you could go back in time and jump in a time machine, what advice would you give 10-year-old Eddie Ackerman?
Ooh. Can we spin it ahead 1 year?
Sure.
11-year-old Eddie Ackerman. I was a guy in sports that I was the classic, what they call great practice player. Man, you watch me practice and you would think, wow, that kid's a star. I don't know how to explain this, but I guess other people can relate. Put me on a field, and in those days it would be Little League. Put two people in the bleachers, and I couldn't tell you my name. I couldn't get out of my own way. I couldn't flip that switch to just be in the moment and play the sport. And so I think I would have said to that little 11-year-old guy, don't give up. Keep plugging at that, and those two things will come together, and you'll be able to perform on the athletic field the way you do on the practice field. I never said that to me, and nobody else ever said that to me. And I guess if I have a regret, I was not a big kid when I was in high school, but I didn't go out for any varsity sports. And I think that was a mistake. And I think it was because of what I just said. So I wish I could have sat down little 11-year-old. I wish I could have told the 11-year-old Eddie Ackerman, if you could see yourself at 22 playing tennis, you'll be shocked. So hang in there. But Vito, I graduated high school. I was 5'7" and 140 pounds. And a year later, I was 5'11", 185.
Wow. You hit a growth spurt there.
Yeah, I had a growth spurt. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's good advice. And I think a lot of people would probably benefit from that. There's, especially when you're young and you hit that first little bit of adversity and you don't have that stick-to-itiveness, to go, you just need that little nudge. So I think that's good advice. We all could go back in time and tell the younger versions of ourselves. Now, it doesn't have to be when you were 11, but can you think of someone that might have been your most memorable classmate? So, I mean, it could be elementary, it could be high school, but somebody that stands out. If I said, tell me about, a character.
Character to a degree, but it's interesting that you bring that up because, I had breakfast this morning with my most memorable classmate. Somehow, and we talked about it today, what the heck caused us guys to be buddies? But we met in 7th grade. His name is Martin Sowa, S-O-W-A. We met in 7th grade, and here we are, guys in our 70s. We're both 74, and we have maintained a close friendship all those years, and it has evolved where we sit down today over breakfast, and we're talking about spirituality and what life is all about and things like that, like our spiritual paths together. My son lives in LA now. He went to school in Savannah, Georgia. He worked in Boulder, Colorado. He moved to Chicago and worked. He moved to LA. He's been all over the place. And he said, Dad, I make friends wherever I go. They know my friend Martin Sowa. He calls him Uncle Mart. He said, Dad, I make friends wherever I go. I'm never going to have what you have. I'm never going to have someone I've been friends with for more than 60 years on a continual basis, seeing them all the time. So, yeah, Martin Sowa, big influence on me. My kids feel like, my kids think he's a superhero. They just see him that way. Both of my kids, they call him Uncle Mart and they adore him.
And isn't it strange that the people, the friends you make that time of your life, I mean, you're lucky that you've established, the continuity where you get to see him so much over the years. But I bet you if you left for 20, 30 years and came back, you'd pick up the conversation where it left off. Like the friends you make at that age level, it's just amazing how that bond stays.
Truly. Yep. When I meet people that I graduated high school with, I genuinely love them. That's the only word for how I feel about them. Every one of them. I just love them.
Well, you know what? Now that you mention that as a question I didn't ask, but I'm curious. What was that like when the jointure happened? Like back in '67, that's when you had all the smaller schools come together to form, Pittsburgh.
Here's what happened. A few years prior to that, the first jointure was Northeast, and Northeast brought together all the small schools. Duryea was the biggest of them. Brought together Duryea, DuPont, Avoca, Hughestown, Jenkins Township. They all came together to form Northeast School District. Pittston City still stood alone, and then, the first year of Pittston area was the fall of 66, the first graduating class 67. So the jointure was put together. It was suddenly Pittston area. There was no building to house, 370 seniors, let alone everybody else. And so we were Pittston area, but I still just so did kids that were in a building in Duryea. And believe it or not, the commercial students, that's what they used to call it then, college prep, general, commercial students were housed in the old Hughestown High School.
Where was that? On the corner?
Go ahead.
Hughestown High School. Where
No, it's Ustown High School is where the host company is now in Ustown on Center Street. That was
Oh, okay.
Ustown High School.
Okay.
And they brought us together. We had never met each other, didn't know much about each other. The football team knew each other, of course, the sports teams. They brought us together to rehearse for graduation. And we rehearsed in the old Jenkins Township High School, where there's now a medical center. And I don't even think that school was functioning, but they brought us together there into, I don't know if it was the gym or what there, where they brought us all together to practice. And then we graduated from what is now Scranton Cultural Center. That's where we graduated from. They didn't know what to do with us. It was this gang of people, and at a graduation, there'd be thousands of people wanting to go to it. So we finished from Scranton Cultural Center. So what it was like, to answer your question, not a lot changed except the name of the school we were graduating from. What it's been like is, to this day, I could meet someone and they could say, "You never knew me, but I graduated from high school with you." I still meet high school classmates that I never knew along the way. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's something that would never be replicated, right? I mean, that only happens once, and
you're right. Yeah. Well, I think it just happened, but it just happened in Wilkes-Barre area. Pulling together everything. You know what it does do, and this is off on a tangent, but we talked about what I'd say to little 11-year-old me. There are athletes who are late bloomers. And when you put together those big mergers, those kids get lost because, there isn't the time to hang around through their freshman year when they haven't fully developed yet. There's no room for them on the football team or the baseball team or the basketball team. They can't cut the mustard. And yet maybe in 2 years they would have been stars, but the big jointures don't really allow for that.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And that was one area where I wanted to go before, but revisit it is that idea of, local sports teams, high school sports teams, and then travel sports teams. And I understand the need for the travel. I mean, you get the best of the best and you put them on teams and you compete against the best of the best from other areas and you really fine tune those skills. But I think you lose out the program building. And the availability of those late bloomers to kind of work their way up to the top. And to me, those skills, the program building skills, are what translate into the work world. You know what I mean? And I think that's where.
Yeah, I understand it. Yep. I understand that.
And I think that we miss out. I mean, you want to, you want to polish diamonds, right? You want to make sure that the ones at the tip of the spear, they keep getting pushed. But then are we sacrificing those other people that, hey, when they're 22, 24, 34, and they're working somewhere with a team of someone, groups of people working towards a goal, are they going to be as good at it as they could have been if they were, working, if they grew up with that, and that's why, and it's, it's all romantic ideas of what education really is and how sports kind of envelopes in with teaching and so on. But, and I get it, the parents that spend the thousands of dollars, so someone's going to be the next Bryce Harper and whatnot. And I understand that, but there's only so many of those people out there, right? The rest of us need to figure out how to be average athletes, but work together and have a living, right?
There's tons of what you just said. We could do a whole podcast on this stuff alone, sometimes the travel leagues that we're talking about and things like that, it comes down to almost specialization where the three sport athlete has become a thing of the past. When we talked earlier about the great athletes that I remember, McDermott from Wyoming area and Charlie Turco from Pittston area, they played all three sports and there was overlap of skills from one sport to the other. Now sometimes we sit down with the kid and say, man, why do you want to run around a basketball court all winter when we can have you in the weight room and you're going to go to a Division I school to play football and make it to the NFL someday. And, I think we rob a lot of experience from a kid when we do that. Again, who am I to say? And I don't want to knock any parent who's doing that. They're doing what they think is best for their child. There's other things too. Believe it or not, when I was in high school, it wasn't till maybe my senior year that they talked about what they were calling homogeneous grouping then. Sometimes back then, you were in a class I was in Ackerman, you were in the class with everybody from A to G. It was all alphabetical. And then it was, we better put all the smart kids in one class and then the next level in another class and so on and so forth. And I look back and I think I was in a class with people of varying skills and varying academic skills, but also varying other skills. Academics wasn't just everything. And I made lifelong friends with kids who never would have been in class with me if we were always grouped based on our IQ or our test scores. And I learned tons and continue to learn tons from kids who weren't gifted academically, but had so much more to offer. And, so like, I mean, I'm all over the place with this, but it's related to the same topic. I think, is there anything wrong with producing well-rounded young people?
No, exactly. And I think, it's a conversation and, that spins off onto another podcast we could have about the whole, partisan concept in politics. Not that I'm going to go into politics and make enemies on this podcast, but, I think all of the problem that we have, whatever you believe in, it could be your faith, it could be your political party, you can have an opposing view, but we've lost the ability to discuss it or even have a good natured argument about it. It's okay to have that kind of argument and be passionate about it, and you can still be friends. But now it's people are mortal enemies. No, you can't say anything. And it's that's,
I always sad. Say the discussions today, one party or the other gets to F you way too fast.
Yeah.
You don't agree with me? Well, F you. And so no, there's no discussion. In terms of any of that, without getting into politics, you know what I don't feel good about? The extremes.
No.
The extremes. Our democracy was built on the fine art of compromise. And where is that anymore? Where is that?
Sure. No, and I think it's like anything else. The extremes get the press, right? That sells the ads for the TV shows and so on. And they are the minorities. Most people live in the middle of the road, and that's what's in this whole thing. If you took 100 people from every walk of life and every kind of money and you ask them things, they all talk about the same thing. I just want my family to have a little bit better than me. I want my family to be safe. I want to be left alone to do what I want to do and have my own belief. Everyone wants the same thing. But then when it plays out with all the extremes, it sounds like these people over there are so much different than me. And so that's not reality. The reality is 60% of the country, probably 67% of the country believes the same thing. And the 20 some on either side, 18 to 20 on either side are the ones that are way out there. But it's what sells. It's all about money. That's where we're at.
Well, here's a media lesson, a shame on me media lesson that a friend of mine who taught me. And it was many, many years ago. We're covering a high school graduation locally, and a kid gets a diploma and does a cartwheel, and it's great photography. The cartwheel, got his diploma and all that kind of stuff. And we put that on the front page. What a great front page photo. And a friend of mine who was an educator said, I know why you put that on the front page, because it was a great picture. But he said, that kid thumbed his nose at education for all 4 years, made a mockery of education, and does a cartwheel at graduation and makes the front page of the paper. He said the great kid that walks up there respectfully and accepts his diploma, he's not on the front page because there was nothing exciting about it. You know what? I stopped doing that kind of stuff. I stopped putting those kinds of pictures on the front page after that. Because that guy was 100% right. But the media tends to do that sort of thing. Like you said, the extremists get all the ink, all the coverage, all the video.
And it's easy. I mean, it's tantalizing, right? It's like watching a car accident. You're drawn to it, but you need to take that beat and say, wait a minute, is this something we really should be celebrating? But that comes with wisdom, and I guess you're a much wiser man than I am. So I know you've learned through those lessons.
I'm much wiser after he called me out. I think a lot of wisdom comes with listening to people, and then it goes back to what we said, where we don't listen to people anymore or compromise. We all think we're right. We talk about, if you have a second for this is going to be a long. In my public speaking classes, I talk about perception. And I tell a story about seeing a little boy in front of me in church one time. And we developed this, he's a few pews in front of me, and we're looking at each other and smiling at each other. And this little kid at first couldn't couldn't make eye contact with me, this stranger. And then all of a sudden we're like buddies. We don't even know each other. But he starts looking at a book of trains that he brought with him. And now I'm his best buddy, sitting 3 pews behind him. And he wants me to see the trains. So he holds the book up. But what he holds up toward me is the cover of the book. He's looking at what he was looking at, this double page display of trains that he wants me to see. But when he holds it up to me, he's seeing the trains and I'm seeing the cover of the book. And I tell my students, he's 3 years old. Developmentally, he can't understand that he has to turn that around for me to see it. Because at 3 years old, he has no concept of another point of view. Mm-hmm. And I say, that's okay. He's 3. That's not okay when you're 30 and you can't understand another point of view. But that's where we are.
That's a great story, great anecdote. I like that. I've thought of that concept, but not that little thing puts it right there in your forefront, because we've all been in church. We've all sat near that kind of, little guy who would do something like that. That's a good one.
Right.
All right. At this point, we're going to do something that I call rapid fire. I'm just going to give you a series of questions. I don't want, you're a great interview and you think your answer's out and well developed. I don't want you to do that this time. I want you, when I give you the question,
answers,
just bang, just tell me what you think. So
I'll do that.
Here we go. The last book that you read.
The Thursday's Murder Club.
Okay. The last movie that you saw.
Probably in the theaters, Barbie.
Okay. Your favorite place to travel to?
Well, I've got a daughter in Austin, Texas, and a son in LA, and they have children. So those 2 places. Take those off the table, anywhere with the beach.
Okay. Would you prefer a long walk or to work out at the gym?
Well, you broke up a little. Repeat that.
Yes. Would you prefer a long walk or to work out in a gym?
I do both. I do both. That's a tough one. I guess if you put a gun to my head, I'd say work out at the gym or a long walk.
What is one pet peeve that you have?
I don't have a lot. Discourteous drivers.
What is one thing that you're curious about right now?
What's going to happen to me when I no longer have a human body?
I like that one. Is there something about people that know you that don't know about you?
They probably don't know that I began school as an art major. All the people would have to have remembered me from a long, long time ago. I'm sure that.
Is there a best leadership tip that you've learned from someone this year?
No, this year. Shut up and listen.
Okay. Beach, pool, or lake?
I'm afraid of flesh-eating bacteria and I'm afraid of sharks. So I guess I'm taking the pool.
Your favorite sports team?
Football, Green Bay Packers. Baseball, St. Louis Cardinals. NBA, I bounce around. This year I rooted for the Celts a lot.
Okay. Do you prefer to read a book or to listen to an audiobook?
Read the book.
Winter or summer?
Summer.
Morning or night?
Morning by far.
Cookie or donut?
Neither.
Oh, okay. And how about this one? Pizza, Old Forge style or round?
Ooh.
You might make some enemies on this one. I don't know.
Oh, man, I am a pizza fan. I could eat pizza every single day. I never made a pizza I didn't like. Gosh. Again, if there's a gun put to my head, I'm just going to say round right now, but I might even say square. Go ahead, pull the trigger. I don't know.
All right. And is there, now you gave me a few throughout this podcast, but is there one quote that you'd like to leave us with? A quote that means something, or maybe you've used a lot throughout your life, or maybe something that you just heard, but a memorable quote.
Here's a little tiny, since you said that, here's what popped into my head. And I heard this a long, long time ago. And it's from Cicero. I guess he was a Roman statesman. And I'm a guy with a sense of humor. And so here's the quote. Never hurt a friend, even in jest. Sometimes we say something that we think is funny, and it hurts the feelings of somebody that we really, really care about. We didn't mean it, but we said it that way. Never hurt a friend, even in jest.
And that kind of circles back to something that I think you answered in the pre-interview questionnaire about a lesson. And I think if you remember what you said about a lesson that you learned in school, or maybe something about how a teacher made someone feel. Do you remember what you wrote?
Yeah, you and I talked about that at one time. Like, sometimes we teachers teach things without knowing we're doing it. And when I look back on, and again, I loved all of my teachers, but teachers have an ability to hurt a student's feelings without realizing they're doing it. It could be by ignoring them. It could be a little more overt than that. But when you're in front of that room, you have tremendous power to elevate or a student or do the opposite. And when I began to teach, I thought, man, I'm going to be on guard to never, ever, ever do that. To never, I guess by ignoring or belittling or, not giving praise enough. I never want to hurt a student's feelings. And that's something I learned by seeing people doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that goes to whether you're a teacher or a leader in any capacity, really, you can't underestimate the impact that you have, the influence you have, because what you do and say and how you treat people, more importantly, has so many ripples. And a comment off the cuff when you're in a bad mood, it might resonate with somebody forever, and it's, the thing somebody once said about teaching, matters, but the heavy part of it is it matters every day. You can't go in there on that Monday morning after the Super Bowl and kind of just, call it in and say things that without thinking, because Johnny in the back, might be affected by that for the rest of his life. And it's, it's a heavy thing. That responsibility is heavy. So when you reference that, I thought, wow, that he gets it. He understands what it's really about. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I've followed your columns and listened to you speak at events for years. I think you're one of the best people out there that can tell the story of not only our local area, but about anything you cover. You have such a wonderful way of just making us feel the passion that person, that story is about. So I commend you on your career. I think you're not just a wonderful communicator and a teacher in your own right and a writer, but for anyone who's ever met you, you're a wonderful guy as well. So thank you for being you. Thank you for being a guest on the show. Hopefully, we can get you on here again, but, thank you very much.
I'm going to everything you just said about me is true. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You have a good day. And again, stay tuned for another episode of A Matter of Principle.
And please have me back someday.
Oh, you absolutely.